Hi and welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, as always. And I just wanted to fill you in a little bit, I suppose, on what's been happening since last time. You'll notice the podcasts have been a tad slower this year than what they were in the past, and that's going to be rectified in the second half of 2022. For now, there's been quite a bit going on in the background for me, and I just thought I'd give you guys a bit of a heads up on what's been happening. So I decided to run a marathon, and that required quite a lot of training and dedication, as does bonsai. So I successfully completed that in April, and then moved on to the Artist in Residence program at the National Bonsai and Penjing Collection of Australia, which was an awesome experience. Getting to spend some time up there with some really talented people, and you know, getting to share knowledge and insight into bonsai and making the world a smaller place when it comes to bonsai is always positive. Then when I returned back to Melbourne, got into to running courses and workshops in a big way, where there'd been a bit of a delay, a bit of hesitation with the world, the way it was spinning. Got the doors open and got people back into classes, and restrictions have lifted, so we got into it full steam ahead. Then I caught COVID. Naturally enough, like just a few people, I suppose, that are listening to this podcast now around the world, and everything stopped for me. So as it stands right now, I'm on the last day of my isolation period, and I'm back into things as of tomorrow. So looking forward to getting back to normal and ready to go. You know, the whole COVID experience sort of set me back for a few days, and I'm back. I'm looking forward to it. So it's going to be a good time. So thanks for coming back. Thanks for tuning in again. Thanks for all the positive feedback that I get from all around the world. It's truly appreciated, and it's great to imagine that this podcast reaches so many different people and inspires so many different people of different abilities and stages of their bonsai journey to actually pick up their scissors, to reach out, to ask questions, to make sure that they're able to progress one step in front of the other. So it's positive. So I wanted to give you an update too on what I'm doing now. So I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, and we're smack in the middle of the autumn or fall period at the moment, and the trees are starting to head towards the dormancy period of winter. So typically daylight pretty short now compared to night hours. The overnight temperatures are quite low, getting cool, and the day temperatures aren't much better, to be honest. There's wet weather around the place, there's cool winds, so everything is heading towards that typical winter dormancy. So that means for me, it's time to start working on my Japanese black pine, and it's a busy period. This is the time of year where, unlike decandling, where you're still at the same number of trees that you have to work on, decandling work is easier, I find, if you do this autumn-winter work on Japanese black pine properly. Because when it comes, you know, your needle plucking, your bud selecting, your wiring, your shaping, you're doing all the structural stuff that you have to do. So then when decandling comes around, it's basically just cutting off the spring candle, and you move through your trees or through your collection fairly quickly if you've done the hard work during this period. So it's always onerous on me to make sure that I do the best that I can. And I'm always reminded that at this time of year, what I'm looking to do always is take one step backwards, take two steps forward. And what I mean by that is when I sit in front of my trees and I get that intimate one-on-one time that I talk about all the time, that doesn't happen very often, then I'll make sure that the time spent with them is valuable, and I work on them with a specific mindset that I have to do the hard things now. I have to make the decisions that I probably would have put off if I had a smaller collection, or if I had had more time up my sleeve. Then I'd probably procrastinate, I think is the right word, where I'd sit there and I'd and I'd and I'd think about it, and I'd ask people what they thought, and I'd do this and I'd do that. Whereas I don't have that luxury. So when I look at something and it's too long, I need to remove it. If it's too thick, it's got to be removed. It's got to be cut off, because those two parameters, too long and too thick, they don't get better over time. They're the two that always catch you out. That, you might not cut it off this year. It might not be next year, but I guarantee you the one after that, or somewhere in the future, you'll look at it and go, it just doesn't sit right. Around the apex of our trees, if you've got thick branches or thick areas up there with long nodes, long stem, then it's only going to magnify over time, and it's going to cost you time in the long run. A delayed decision now means that in years to come, you're going to cut off, 3, 4, 5 years worth of growth. All that effort that you've put in, or all those resources your bonsai's allocated to that one area, and you end up cutting it off anyway. So I am constantly at myself when I look at it and think, I think I'm done now. I'm going to put it back on the bench. Just sit back, swivel back from the tree maybe a couple of meters, sit back, look at things and go, you're sure you're done? Because having an area that's maybe a bit thin now, that's a bit stark, because you've cut something off that probably, is taking and filling and making the tree look really pretty for now. I'd rather do that than have it come back next year and go, how didn't I see this last year? Or, once I muster up the courage to cut something off, it's like, well, how long have I looked at that for? How long has that branch been a problem for me? And as soon as it goes, my mind starts to tick away and think, okay, now this can develop, that can change. This is the plan. This is where the tree is going to get to in the future. So you suddenly see where you're heading with things, as opposed to that treading water going, no, I'll get to that next time. Because you never do. You just once you've got compromised structure on your tree, it's always going to be compromised. Wiring's a great tool that we use. Wiring's an awesome tool that I've talked about till I'm blue in the face, that we can use to improve the structure of our bonsai, to allow light and air to get in, to make sure that we can make our tree as powerful and strong as we possibly can. But it's only got certain functionality or certain limitations on what it can achieve. Branches growing in the wrong direction that are wired to the shape of a dog's leg will always be the shape of a dog's leg. So the only option you've got is, at some point or another, is to remove that branch. You just or restructure the tree, redesign the tree. You can't keep going forward with this baggage on a bonsai that just shouldn't be there. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. I also do a really important health assessment, and I've talked about health assessments before, and I think it's crucial that every time you sit that close to one of your bonsai, that you can look at it and you can analyse and see exactly what it is that the tree's at right now. Look for things, discoloration of foliage. Is there weaker branches? Is there longer internodes? Is the tree got some kind of pest on it that you've not seen before? Is there stunted growth? Is the growth that's coming out not right? Like, you look at things and it's contorted, it's twisted. Is there some specific area of the tree that's been damaged? Is it something that's environmental for that tree that maybe a change in position can do? It's all that stuff that is really super important. And when I do the health assessment too, I do it before I work on the tree, because I think, I know that once you've worked on a tree, that's it. It's set on a path. So one of the really important health assessments I do is to analyse the regional strength of the tree. So when I look at a black pine, for instance, how they operate is apex is always the strongest and lowest branches are always the weakest. So before I start removing foliage and needle mass, I look at it and think to myself, is there an area that's too strong? If there is, can I remove it? Or if I can't remove it, if it stays as part of the structure of the bonsai, is there a way that I can turn the dial down on it by needle plucking a little bit heavier than what I normally would? And the other side of that coin is look at the lower branches, look at any of the branches and say, is something too weak? And if something's too weak, you can see it. You know, in the strong areas, you'll have, on a black pine, you'll have beautiful strong needles that are very straight. And they look perfect. They look like what you see in the bonsai magazines or online. Then the weaker areas, the needles are a bit thinner, they're a bit longer, they're a bit twistier, they're not quite as structured as other clusters of needles that you see, and that's as a result of the tree really struggling. And normally it's, you know, in my experience, it's from lack of sunlight, lack of available sun's resources where it's growing, and it's more than likely because it's an inner branch, or more than likely because it's a shaded branch. So I look at those areas and think, yeah, okay, it's a weaker area. How do I fix that? Can I open up the foliage above that area? Can I reposition some branches? Alternatively, when I start getting ready for the needle plucking stage, should I be leaving more needle mass in that area? Because more needle mass means more strength. So I turn the dial down on the strong areas by plucking heavier, and I turn the dial up on the weaker areas by plucking less. So it's really important that you always think about that set of scales and working out exactly where your bonsai's at, and how do I get that, ultimately, how do I get that set of scales to be balanced? How do I get the strong areas on the same plane as the weaker areas? And that comes from pruning. You know, pruning is your tool of choice when it comes to allocating where resources are allocated on your bonsai and where they're not. So it's never just a matter of throwing a tree on the bench, making it look pretty and putting it back out there. It's so much more that goes on, and it doesn't need to take 4 or 5 hours of analysis of every tree that you do. It can be a very quick snapshot, and the more trees that you've got, and the more times that you do it, and the more history you have with a particular tree and knowing how it's going to respond, that's the best way to understand exactly how things are going to pan out for you longer term. So another thing that weighs heavily on my mind at the moment too, considering the period of time that I'm in for my bonsai, is that repotting is not far away. Repotting is only months away now, and it's something that you need to be ready for. So that's on the planning board at the moment, with lots to think about and lots to ponder, or lots to organise with regard to getting in stocks and materials that I need. Have I got the right pots? But the most important part is going through the collection and flagging things, saying, will you be repotted? Won't you be repotted? And it's a really important question to ask, because this window of opportunity doesn't present itself, every week with that tree, and the decision that I make as to whether it's done or whether it's not can have a massive impact on the tree. Does it keep taking steps forward in the correct manner, or does it slip backwards? You know, so there's two scenarios. The first scenario is that I repot too soon, which is, I suppose, a safe way or a comfortable way of doing things is to repot probably a little bit more frequently than what you should, because the repotting process is, you're reinvigorating the tree, you're getting it going again, you're pulling the starter cord on this tree and firing it back up again. The trouble with that is the uncontrolled growth that you get in that period after repotting, where you can destroy the structure of a highly refined tree pretty quickly by repotting it too frequently, by not having the roots contained for a period of time, and just allowing for that rejuvenation process to happen, where your internode lengths race away, they fly away from you, and the longer something gets, the thicker it gets. So the thicker it gets, the coarser it gets. The whole apex, the whole structure of a highly refined tree can be destroyed by incorrect management after a repotting process. So that's something that I definitely think about on the trees that are heading towards that finished, if they ever are, but that towards that finished stage of their design, their current design. And it's, I ponder to myself and think, well, really, would another year be better? Will you get an even finer, more delicate growth that will take this tree to that next level, to really high end? Again, you flip the coin on this thing and, okay, I don't repot it. Is there enough capacity in there for the roots to maintain the structure that it's got, or will it be to the detriment of the tree? Will the tree then start making decisions on what it keeps and what it drops because it physically cannot support the structure that it's got? What happens above happens below. So if those roots start to struggle, it doesn't matter how much fertilizer you're putting on there. It doesn't matter how much water you're pumping into that tree. If the roots cannot manage what it's got, then that's going to come at the expense of some of the foliage above the soil surface. And, it's not up to us to decide what it keeps and what it doesn't. And it might be that your favourite branch or a piece of the apex that you've worked so hard on, or new buds that you've grown, you've forced trees to back bud, and you're starting to build that inner structure on the tree, then all of a sudden that starts to die, because the bonsai is a great survivor. The trees are great survivors. They'll do what they have to do to get through to the next round, and that will be at the expense of something within its structure, so it can continue to survive and live. So I do think a lot about repotting months and months before the actual process itself, and make the decision. Sometimes I get it wrong. A lot of times I get it right, thank goodness. But there are definitely those times where after the repotting season's come and gone that I sit back and think, I really should have, and I kick myself, and I stress about it, and I do what I have to do to baby it to get through and protect and shelter as much as I possibly can. But, the next year comes around and I go through the same process, and I'll make exactly the same mistakes, because that's I think how I push my bonsai to be the best they possibly can. I always want things to keep going forward. I always want to have the best possible bonsai that I can, and I'll do whatever I have to do to get that. And I live and I breathe bonsai, and I take it one step at a time, and I try and learn from everything that I've done along the way. So don't feel too bad if you make mistakes, because we all do it. All right, so the other couple of things that I've got on the go at the moment too is, as we're getting towards the middle part of autumn, fall, depending on where you are around the world, I get into the final prune of my deciduous trees. I love doing this at this time of year, because it's my final prune that I get to do on structural work for the trees. They look great when they've still got their colouring leaves and their foliage is all in line. The silhouette's back to perfect. I've removed thick, coarse growth that's come around. That initial burst of growth that we get when autumn comes around, and there's still temperature, there's still long daylight, and the trees, get that spring in their step like it is spring, and they shoot off and have a bit of growth. Well, now's the time for me to go through and remove all of that on all the trees that I'm developing where I don't want sacrifice branches. The next thing I start to do is start to look at leaf removal, which will happen in the next few weeks as those autumn leaves start to lose their vigour and start to turn brown, and the trees start to waste resources on them. Once they've got everything they possibly can from those leaves and they're ready to fall off, I'll come in the workshop and I'll start removing the foliage.
spend my youth dropping coins in a wishing well.
While I'm on the topic of autumn and leaf removal and all that sort of thing, it's really, really, really super important that you maintain the hygiene standards around your collection at this time as well. This is when I find a lot of leaf litter sitting around the place. Gets into the foliage of the trees, but also onto the benches, and it just looks unsightly. And I've got an enormous oak above part of my collection, and every year the thing drives me insane with dropping 4 trillion leaves down, and it's constant for almost from day one of autumn until the very last day of autumn. This thing drops leaves, so I don't get much reprieve. But it is a reminder to me that being vigilant and cleaning the area around my bonsai especially means that I'm not going to get a lot of insects moving in and taking shelter around those areas. So it's a time of year where I find being a bit lax with things can cost you in coming months. You might not see it over winter, but you'll definitely see it around springtime now. If you don't keep up the hard work and keep the area clean where your bonsais are stored, then you're going to pay for it. I find that I use leaf vacuums and rakes and a leaf blower and all that sort of stuff, but also physically picking things up and moving them means that I get to have a look, and you'll find that every time I move a bunch of leaves that can only be there possibly for a few days, every time I move them, there's a massive bugs floating around in those areas. So staying on top of it, also, that leaf litter falling into the foliage of your trees, if it sits there long term, is it bringing with it fungal issues that you just don't want. So by being on top of things and not necessarily always working on your bonsai to work on your bonsai, but doing things around them that help your bonsai makes a very big difference. Okay, so I've got this little book that I write down lots of things bonsai related. Sometimes it's for the podcast, sometimes it's for me, sometimes it's just for the sake of getting it out of my head onto paper. And I was working on trees recently, and I was doing something, and it was shaping a tree, and it was just as I was putting wire onto a tree, I stopped and I thought back about my learning with how to wire, and I suddenly had all these nice images come through my head of where I'd learnt, and I looked down at how I was actually holding the wire. And I remember the time that I was shown, that's how you hold the wire to guide it around the branch. And it brought me great joy and great satisfaction. And I just wrote down in my little book, find beauty in the detail. And it makes the hairs on my arm stand up when I read it out loud now, because it is something that I find incredibly personal and incredibly important when it comes to something like bonsai, the art form of bonsai. Whether you're into it for the horticultural side because you love growing things, whether it's because you love trees, whether it's because you like the art side of it, whether it's the design, whether it's the future planning, whether it's the immediate now, I like what I see. Whatever it is, it's entirely personal. None of them are right or none of them are wrong. For me, it's because I think all of the above, every single aspect of bonsai brings me immense joy, and sometimes I find that I can become possibly a little bit mechanical in my approach to bonsai and how I see things and how I plan things out. And sometimes it's really nice to sit back, smell the roses and find beauty in the detail, and just take that time where you're not busting your hump to get something done because you've got to move on to the next task or the next chore or the next whatever. It's just sometimes nice to sit there and enjoy little things like looking at your hand and how you're holding that wire and thinking back to a memory that's very positive and that sets you on a path to do something that you never would have done before. And I think it is amazing to think that, you know, it's the detail, it's the small things in bonsai that really make a difference. You know, taking a tree and smashing it out to look pretty, and then moving on to the next one and doing the same thing without finesse, without enjoying the process, without doing things to the absolute 100% of your ability that you've got, whatever that is cheating not only the bonsai, not only the tree that you're working on, but yourself. Because you deserve, and the bonsai deserves more than anything, to have the utmost respect placed on it, that you do give it your absolute. And if you can't, as I've said this many times before, if you're not in the headspace or the position to allocate the time that you need to do the job properly, don't do it. Just leave it. Leave it for now. Come back to it in a day or two's time. It's a beautiful part about bonsai. I've had people that I've worked with that, you know, it can be possibly 2 years where they've been on a tangent and bonsais have been in the background and they've been so busy, justifiably busy doing whatever it is, that all of a sudden, you know, it comes back to their mind that, or their fore of thought that, hey, listen, bonsai's back, and they've kept their trees alive. You know, they may not have done brilliantly. They've probably treaded water for a couple of years, but they're still there. They're still alive. They've done what they've had to do to get the tree through. The tree's definitely done what it's had to do to survive. So coming back on board, that's when you re-pick up those scissors and the wire cutters and the branch cutters and you get that tree in front of you again. That's when you sit down and you give it everything. You give it absolutely... You find beauty in the detail, you know, the way the wire's put on the branch, the way the branch is bent, the way it's positioned, the way the foliage sits once the branch has been positioned, the shadow it creates on the trunk. You know, when you've got negative space, you know, how one branch sits above another, the gap that you've got there. What do you see when you look through? Is it the side of a branch that's coming from the back of the tree? Or haven't you thought about that detail? Is the branch tucked around a little bit too far? You know, it's the small things. It's the minor adjustments that's, I think, really sets apart a lot of people. And those minor adjustments can be, or the finesse can be taught to you. You can see that. You can learn that over time through evolution of your bonsai brain and how you look at things online or in books or in classes or in workshops or seeing someone perform something. But it's the dedication and the time that's allocated and the finesse. It's the detail that you apply, how you hold that branch, whether you stuff your hand into a set of needles and damage them to move that branch, or whether you come up underneath that branch and then gently reposition it so every needle's left intact on that branch. That's the beautiful part about bonsai. That's the next level. That's when you know that you're taking things on your journey to wherever it's going to get to, is when you start focusing on those really, really small things. That's when you take the next step. You've got to be in the moment with your trees as well. Like the word mindfulness, that's used everywhere these days. I find that, you know, you put an ad on TV or you walk past a yoga studio and there's mindfulness plastered in front of you. And I try and avoid these sort of things and talking about them. But the one part that I do enjoy and I encourage is that being in the moment and being mindful about exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve with your bonsai. Not thinking about other things, not being distracted, but for your own sake, for your own mental well-being, and for the tree's advancement, just make sure that you only focus on exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve at that very point. And I've got a story that goes with this as well. I was working at a customer's house a long time ago, years and years ago, and a phone was running hot with people trying to track me down for one thing or another. Nothing to do with bonsai, but I was being chased. And I remember, answering calls in between working on this tree, going back to the tree, then the phone would ring again, answer it. And anyway, whatever had happened, I remember exactly what it was, but it's not important. There's something had gone wrong, and I was distracted. And as I was answering calls, I put the phone on speaker, and so I continued to work on the tree because I wanted to do the job I was employed to do for this customer, as well as managing this situation that I was being thrust into. So I was working on a blue spruce, and they're quite brittle at times of the year, and they require dedicated work. So I'm pretty sure you can see where this is going. And I was distracted, and I was thinking about other things, and I wasn't thinking about how I was working on this tree. And as I worked it, I snapped a branch. And sometimes when you're working on trees at certain times of the year, when a branch snaps, it's not just a little crack. The whole thing just snaps straight off in my hands. And it was a fairly key branch up towards the top of the tree. And I was so disappointed with myself that I stopped, bought some time on the situation that I was managing, and said, give me 2 hours and I'll come back to you, which is what I should have done from the very start. I should have tried to multitask when it comes to something like that. And then had to fess up to the client, had to redesign the tree, and got back on board, cleared my thought process, and it was a good result in the end. But I still think about that branch to this day. Sometimes you think back on things and they're insignificant. Sometimes you think back on them and you think, well, that's a life lesson. That's something I'm not going to let happen to me or to a bonsai ever again. And that I find now that I do. If I'm in my workshop and I'm working on a tree and something happens, one of my kids wants my attention, or my phone rings, the first thing I do is stop working on the bonsai, and I'll make a decision. With my family, it's easy. I stop working on the bonsai and get involved with what I have to be or should be. When it comes to my phone ringing, it's, make a decision, put it on silent, move it out of the way, keep doing what you're doing, or stop what you're doing, focus on that, resolve what you have to resolve, then come back to this. Because, as I said, the great thing about bonsai is that it's not always time critical what we do with our trees. And especially when it comes to important things, it should be an enjoyable process. It shouldn't be a task. It shouldn't be a chore. It should be something that we savour, that we love, that we really put everything we've got, and we're in the moment. You throw yourself in there like you got a VR headset on, and all you can see is the tree, nothing else, no further distractions. You're clocked into that tree 100% because we do these things not because we're forced to. We do them because we enjoy them. As I said before, whether it's horticultural, whether it's design, whether it's somewhere in between, we're doing it because we enjoy it. And never, ever, ever forget that, for your sake and for the sake of your bonsai as well. So that's about this episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast wrapped up. I do appreciate you sticking around. I do enjoy that this podcast is reaching many people, and that bonsai is alive and well. Thanks for all the contact too. No matter whether you're in Hervey Bay or you're in Germany, it's always really nice to hear from people, and it's we've got the same issues. Everyone around the world has got the same concerns with their bonsai, and if I can help in any way and do whatever I possibly can, then please reach out. Get me via any of the socials, or Bonsai Matsu, anywhere. Have a look at my YouTube channel too. There's videos on there. There are more coming. Like I said, the first half of 2022 is destined to be busy. It's been flat out so far, and it looks like it's going to remain the same way. But then I'm hopeful that the second half of the year things change drastically, and you should see plenty more podcasts flowing, as well as more YouTube footage, as well as more workshops and courses and everything else that runs around bonsai for me as well. It's not going anywhere. It's a very strong passion that I've got, and I'm going to be feeding that fire, fueling those flames, I can tell you. So just as a heads up for the next podcast too, I was chatting with someone recently and in a workshop that I was conducting, and the question came up about building an apex, and I thought that's a really cool topic to talk about on the podcast. So that'll be priority for the next podcast is building an apex, because it seems to be a fairly common concern. I know that when the question was asked of me, I thought back to when I was first developing younger stock, not stock that you'd purchased that looked like a bonsai, but when you're purchasing younger stuff, you always, the apex was always the thing. You could wire out a branch, you could make a branch look good, but when it got to the apex, it was like there's nothing there. How do you get this thing going? How do you make this look like a bonsai that I've got in the back of my head? So that's one of the topics that we're going to cover off next podcast episode. And the other is how to reignite the spark with your bonsai. So I've got a few little tips and tricks that if you're this far into the podcast series, season 4 now, and you need a bit of a spark as to what's going to get you to get that tree in front of you again, what's going to make you pull out your scissors, what's going to make you want to spend time with your trees, then the next episode hopefully will be something that helps. So until then, thank you very much for sticking around. Give me some positive reviews if you've enjoyed the podcast series so far on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's on every platform, I believe. So yeah, please stick around and make sure that you enjoy spending time with your bonsai, and think about what I've said in this podcast about being in the moment with your trees and doing everything to the best of your ability and enjoying the little things, making sure that it's perfect, absolutely perfect. When you wire a branch, when you position a branch, when you even make a cut to the branch, do it with the cleanest scissors that you possibly can. It's all about the fine detail. That's bonsai. That's us. So until next time, keep your scissors sharp, keep your trees watered, make sure your fertilizer bags are full, and enjoy your bonsai. Until next time, happy bonsai.